Well, I just finished the story, a version of the story that I first heard from my friend Glenn Norton probably 45 years ago. So it's oral to a literary tradition, and you'll probably know the story as I tell it. But it has a new title, and it's called The Bamboo Katana. A katana is a kind of samurai sword, and a bamboo katana would be what the samurai would practice with. And so this took an entirely different twist, but I hope I maintained the integrity of the story. So it's called Bamboo Katana, copyright 2018 by me, Philip Kaveny. Once upon a time, before there was time, the word whistled itself into existence and the universe followed. The great dog Bumble barked 3 times and the word called the stick into existence. The stick called the man and the woman into existence in order that it be thrown to Bumble. Then, a long time after, when the 100-year raven had worn down the 100-mile mountain with his wingtips, the dog Bumble said, "I'm tired of this game. Tell me a story." The man said, "I only know 2 stories, but they came before you barked 3 times, and now they demand I tell them to you. The first is about the sword master in the lout, who, after his father and 6 brothers died in the greatest of all wars, found he was the only one left to defend his family's land. But the lout knew what he was. He knew he could not defend his father's realm, so he went to the greatest of all swordsmen and said, with his sad, sick eyes, 'Teach me what you know, so I can be a swordmaster and defend what I must.' The swordmaster was not a cruel man, but he was an honest man, and said, 'You know what you are. You're a lout. I could not make a swordsman out of you any more than the blacksmiths could make a steel katana from bamboo. Even if I had 100 lifetimes, I could not teach you.' Then something came over the swordsman. As he unsheathed his katana, he made a small cut on his own palm and drew blood as he must if the sword was drawn. Then he said, 'My sword was made from iron that fell burning from the sky by the dwarves that live inside Mount Fuji.' Some say he was about to give the lout the gift of death from a great blade, but it was not to happen because the swordmaster, and here I've got the Japanese character for this, Karinen, janitor, had quit, and the swordmaster said, 'Since you're a worthless lout and a dead man everywhere you go, stay with me and be my janitor. Cede all that is yours, including your sister's and mother's destiny, to the emperor's protection, and fulfill your destiny to empty my chamber pots.' So the lout, choosing destiny over death, became the swordmaster's janitor. Many years passed, and the swordmaster was not a cruel man, but he was rather easily amused and loved to catch the lout unaware as he bent over to scrub the inside of the master's chamber pot. The swordmaster would trip over all his buckets and sponges. As the years passed, he seemed harder and harder to catch the lout unaware, let even alone find the lout when he did not want to be found, even though the house was always spotless and the meals were prepared to perfection. The louse and the swordmaster became more like friends than master and servant. Then one day the swordmaster heard a whisper, more like a stage whisper from the garden, that summoned him to see the lout, who was practicing movements, parries, and thrusts with a bamboo katana. One of many the lout had lovingly made to be as hard as steel and light as the wind, which was now the way the lout moved. Sometimes he moved like a red deer, sometimes he moved like a snow tiger, and sometimes he moved with the fury of a charging water buffalo. The lout spoke to the master and said, "All these long years I have been your janitor. I have served you faithfully. I have cooked your food. I have washed your clothes. I have cleaned your privy. Now teach me the way of the sword." The sword master knew the outcome if he fought the lout, even with his sword that fell from the sky. So he said, "There is nothing more for me to teach you. My sword is your sword. My house is your house. I go to live with the monks in the mountain. You must live in the world, which is coming to you sooner than you think." The second story. News spread quickly throughout the empire of the bamboo swordmaster that none dared challenge. It spread even to the court of the emperor, where his favorite master of the tea ceremony had accidentally bumped into an evil but powerful warlord at court. Now the tea master was forced to accept the warlord's challenge. He was so powerful not even the emperor could intervene. The emperor cleared the roads to the court and brought the bamboo swordmaster to fight in the tea master's place. When the bamboo swordmaster arrived in court, all knew that the tea master must face the warlord himself. But the bamboo swordmaster asked the tea master these questions. Is it not true that you've never held a sword in your hand in your life? Is it not true that you love the tea ceremony more than anything? Then you face the evil warlord on the plane of honor. You must love and revere the sword as the same way as the instruments of the tea ceremony. Its blade is your redemption from this evil man. 6 days later, on the plane of honor, when the evil warlord saw the grace with which the tea master held his sword, he threw himself from shame from a 500-foot cliff, and the ocean would not accept him, so as he lay broken on the rocks, the crabs ate him. In the remaining time I have left, I'm going to talk about a Russian named Suvorov. And there is what we call the Suvorov conjecture. And this has to do with the inception of Operation Barbarossa, which was a German invasion of the Soviet Union June 22nd, 1941, which was the greatest several-year battle in the history of the world. Now, I've recently been wondering who started World War II, and the accepted reason sort of is to say, well, it was Hitler in his demand for world power found it necessary to attack the Soviet Union even after they had made a non-aggression pact and split up Poland. But Suvorov says that in fact the Operation Barbarossa was what you call a preemptive strike, and that the Germans had no choice but to attack as they did because the Soviet Union was going to spill out into the world. And it's an attractive thesis, and I wrote a paper for Dr. Lazda about it some years ago, but I realized now that I can do more with it. And in fact, what Suvorov was really doing was quoting Nazi generals who were later hanged as war criminals who were trying to defend themselves and deflect the war blame away from themselves and onto Stalin, who by himself was certainly as evil a man as Hitler. What I did today as I started thinking about this again is I hadn't realized that Suvorov informants were in fact war criminals who were trying to justify their position. So I have something new to add to discuss about what I call the Suvorov conjecture. And in the process of doing that, I'm going to be rewriting a paper that I did for Dr. Lazda some years ago. I just got off the phone with him. And he did what a professor does for you, which is so important. Suvorov is respected enough that I would not discredit myself to write a paper on him. He's among the respected historians, and I'll bet he has an email, and he might hear from me. So from going from nothing and no expectation of production, because my production chief, Serena, had some extra time, I get to do these two things sort of rough and ready as a public intellectual. Now the Bamboo Sword Master is it's an old story. It goes back when I was a young man in my 30s. But there's so much different in the story now, especially about the Bamboo Katana. That actually comes out of my experience. I was once at a science fiction convention where a young man who thought he was a master of stage fighting ridiculed me and poked me like in my stomach with his little sword. And I said nothing until it came time for him to demonstrate. And I lined up saying I'd never held a katana in my life, but if he could show me a few things, I'd try to do what I could. And to make a long story short, with my wife as a witness, I made a complete fool out of this young theatrical stage fighter. And he looked at me and said, "Where did you learn that?" And I said, "Learn what?" Followed me around like a puppy after that. Well, so you can see that there's many threads that work their way into a story. And this even ties in with my Buddhist theme of creation out of nothingness. Because none of what you have here that I'm talking about, I had until I checked my email, formed it into a story in 45 minutes, and this is where we are now. And I think this is probably the point to say things pull together. And this idea of creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothingness, is an amazing theme, and it's driving me with creative energy right now. And I would say that some of you should give me some books to review, especially nice, expensive, powerfully interesting books, so I can give them the attention that they deserve. Because I forget that I too am a public intellectual and a scholar, as Dr. Lazda was kind enough to remind me. So it's really an upbeat day, and I love that story. So that'll be it for today, and check in when you can, and support me if you will.